The cardboard beneath Marcus felt soggy from the morning dew seeping through the concrete of downtown Portland. He pressed his back against the cold brick wall behind the old movie theater, pulling his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders. 17 years old, and this corner had been home for 8 months now, ever since the group home kicked him out on his birthday. His stomach cramped with hunger, but Marcus had learned to ignore that feeling. What he couldn't ignore was the sound of sobbing coming from across the street. A girl, maybe 13 or 14, sat on the steps of the closed library, her shoulders shaking with each cry. Her school uniform was clean, but her feet were bare, red and swollen from walking on the cold pavement. Marcus recognized that kind of crying, the deep, hopeless kind that comes when you've hit rock bottom and can't see a way out. Marcus looked down at his own feet. His sneakers were his most prized possession, a pair of worn Nike Air Force Ones that he'd found in perfect condition at a thrift store 3 months ago. They were a size too big, but they kept his feet warm and dry. More importantly, they made him feel human when everything else in his life made him feel invisible. The girl's crying grew louder. Marcus closed his eyes, fighting an internal battle he'd had countless times before. Every homeless person knew the rule. Take care of yourself first because no one else will. But watching her sit there, vulnerable and hurt, reminded him of his younger sister Maya, the one he'd been separated from when they went into foster care 5 years ago. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. Marcus stood up, brushed the dirt off his jeans, and walked across the empty street. Each step felt heavy, not from the weight of his body, but from the weight of what he was about to do. "Hey," he said softly as he approached the library steps. The girl looked up, startled. Her eyes were red and puffy, streaked with tears. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and looked like she came from a decent family, the kind that Marcus used to have before everything fell apart. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, even though the answer was obvious. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. I'm fine," she lied, the way people always did when they were anything but fine. Marcus sat down on the step beside her, maintaining enough distance to not seem threatening. "I've been watching you cry for the past 20 minutes. That doesn't look fine to me." The girl stared at him for a moment, taking in his appearance, the dirty clothes, the hollow cheeks, the way he carried himself like someone who'd learned to expect nothing good from the world. "My mom," she started, then stopped. "My mom took my shoes." "She took your shoes?" Marcus frowned. "Why would she do that? She's sick. In her head, you know. Sometimes she does things that don't make sense. She said I was getting too proud, walking around in nice shoes while she suffered." The girl's voice cracked. "She threw them in the dumpster behind our apartment building. I tried to find them, but..." Marcus nodded. He understood. Mental illness, addiction, trauma, they all twisted people into versions of themselves that their children couldn't recognize. His own mother had struggled with demons that eventually consumed her, leaving Marcus and Maya alone in a system that didn't know what to do with them. "Where do you live?" Marcus asked. "About 2 miles from here. I've been walking since yesterday afternoon trying to figure out how to get home without her seeing my feet like this." She looked down at her bare, bleeding feet. "I can't go to school tomorrow. Everyone will ask questions." Marcus stared at her feet, then at his own shoes. The internal battle raged again, but this time it was shorter. This time, his heart won. "What size shoe do you wear?" he asked. 7, why? Marcus looked down at his size 9 Nikes. They'd be big on her, but they'd work. They'd protect her feet and get her home safely. "Stand up," he said. "What?" "Just stand up for a second." Confused, the girl stood. Marcus knelt down and began unlacing his shoes. "What are you doing?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. "Giving you my shoes." "No," she stepped back. "No, I can't take your shoes. You need them." Marcus continued unlacing. "You need them more than I do right now. But you're..." She gestured at his appearance, at the cardboard bed visible across the street. "You're homeless. You need them to survive." Marcus paused, one shoe halfway off. He looked up at her with eyes that held more wisdom than any 17-year-old should possess. "Yeah, I'm homeless. And yeah, these shoes have kept me alive for months. But you know what? I'm tough. I've learned how to survive out here. You haven't. You're just a kid dealing with something that no kid should have to deal with." He pulled off the first shoe and held it out to her. "Besides, winter's almost over. Spring's coming and I can figure something else out." The girl stared at the shoe in his outstretched hand, tears flowing freely now, but different tears. These weren't tears of despair. They were tears of disbelief that a stranger would show her such kindness. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. "Marcus. And you don't need to know anything else about me except that I know what it's like to have nothing, and I know what it's like to have someone show up when you need them most." He pulled off the second shoe. "What's your name?" "Lily." "Okay, Lily, put these on. They'll be big, but they'll get you home safe." With shaking hands, Lily took the shoes. They were warm from Marcus's body heat, and despite being used, they were clean and well-maintained. She slipped them on, and Marcus was right. They were too big, but they felt like a blessing on her sore feet. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. Marcus stood up, his socked feet already feeling the cold bite of the concrete. "You don't need to thank me. Just, when you grow up and you see someone who needs help, remember this moment. Pass it forward." Lily hugged him suddenly, fiercely. Marcus stiffened. He wasn't used to physical affection anymore, but then relaxed and hugged her back. "You're going to be okay," he whispered. "Both of us are going to be okay." As Lily walked away, her steps more confident now in Marcus's shoes, Marcus returned to his cardboard bed. His feet were already numb from the cold, but his heart felt warmer than it had in months. He had no idea that across the street, hidden in the shadows of an alley, someone had been watching the entire exchange. If this story is touching you in some way, comment where you're watching us from. Every place has its own pain, and sometimes it's incredible to see how we all connect through stories so human. The night felt colder without his shoes. Marcus wrapped his feet in the old newspaper he'd collected earlier, but the ink smeared against his socks, and the dampness from the ground seeped through everything. He hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a time, waking up each time his feet went completely numb. As the first hints of dawn painted the Portland sky a pale gray, Marcus heard footsteps approaching. Heavy boots on concrete, moving with purpose. He'd learned to distinguish between different types of footsteps during his months on the street. These weren't the quick, nervous steps of someone trying to avoid eye contact with a homeless person. These steps belonged to someone coming directly toward him. Marcus opened his eyes to see a tall figure standing about 10 feet away. The man was in his 40s, wearing a simple black jacket and jeans, but there was something about his posture, straight, alert, disciplined, that immediately told Marcus this wasn't an ordinary passerby. "You're Marcus," the man said. It wasn't a question. Marcus sat up quickly, his instincts on high alert. "Who's asking?" The man stepped closer, and in the growing light, Marcus could see his face clearly. He had short graying hair, kind eyes with lines around them that spoke of both laughter and hardship, and a small scar running along his left jawline. "My name is David Rodriguez," the man said. "I was here last night. I saw what you did for that girl." Marcus's muscles tensed. "Are you a cop?" "No." David reached into his jacket pocket, and Marcus prepared to run, but the man pulled out a thermos and a paper bag. "I'm someone who understands what real courage looks like." The smell of coffee drifted from the thermos, and Marcus's stomach growled audibly. He hadn't eaten in 36 hours. "I'm not looking for charity," Marcus said, even as his eyes remained fixed on the bag. "Good," David replied, settling down on the concrete about 5 feet away from Marcus. "Because I'm not offering charity, I'm offering respect." He opened the bag and pulled out a breakfast sandwich wrapped in foil, still warm. "Ham, egg, and cheese from the deli on Morrison. And this coffee is from my own kitchen. My wife makes it stronger than most people can handle." Marcus stared at the food, his pride warring with his hunger. "What do you want?" "To tell you a story," David said, unwrapping the sandwich and setting it between them. 23 years ago, I was 19 years old, fresh out of high school, thinking I knew everything about the world. I was walking through downtown San Antonio late one night when I saw this old homeless man getting beaten up by 3 guys. David poured coffee into the thermos cap and set it down next to the sandwich. They were taking turns kicking him while he was down. He was probably 70 years old, couldn't defend himself, and you know what I did? Marcus shook his head. "Nothing. I walked past. Told myself it wasn't my business, that I might get hurt if I got involved. That old man could have died that night for all I know." David's voice carried a weight of regret that had clearly lived with him for decades. "I went home to my warm bed and tried to forget about it." "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. "Because what you did last night, giving up the one thing that was keeping you safe and warm for a stranger, that's the man I should have been that night in San Antonio. That's the man I've been trying to become ever since." David gestured toward the food. "Eat, please. I'm not going anywhere until you do." Marcus's resolve finally cracked. He grabbed the sandwich and took a huge bite, closing his eyes as the warm food hit his empty stomach. It was the best thing he'd tasted in weeks. "I joined the army the next year," David continued as Marcus ate. "Served 3 tours in Afghanistan. Thought maybe if I put myself in danger for other people, it would balance out that night when I was a coward." "Did it?" Marcus asked between bites. "No. Because I learned something over there. Real courage isn't about facing bullets or explosions. Real courage is making the right choice when you have everything to lose and nothing to gain. What you did last night? That was the kind of courage that most people, including soldiers, never find. Marcus finished the sandwich and reached for the coffee. It was strong, just like David had warned, but it warmed him from the inside out. You said you saw what happened. Were you following me? No, David laughed. I was following my 15-year-old daughter. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Sophia snuck out of the house last night. I tracked her phone and found her hanging out with some kids behind the theater. I was waiting in my car trying to figure out whether to drag her home or let her think she was getting away with it, when I saw you and that girl on the library steps. David's expression grew serious. I watched the whole thing. I saw you struggle with the decision. I saw you choose to give up something precious to help someone you'd never met. And I realized that my daughter was seeing it too. She was watching from the alley where she was hiding from me. What did she say? She came to the car crying, said she'd never seen anything like that before, asked me why someone who had nothing would give away something so important. David paused. I didn't have a good answer for her. Marcus set down the empty thermos cap. So what happens now? David stood up and brushed off his jeans. Now you get your shoes back and a whole lot more. I don't understand. I made some phone calls this morning. To friends, to family, to people in my community who needed to hear about what you did. David smiled. Turns out, Marcus, that when you show people what real kindness looks like, they want to be part of it. In the distance, Marcus could hear vehicles approaching. Multiple vehicles. What did you do? Marcus asked, getting to his feet. David's smile widened. I told everyone I could about the homeless boy who gave his shoes to a crying girl, and they all wanted to meet you. The first vehicle that came into view was a pickup truck, its headlights cutting through the early morning haze. Then another, and another. Marcus watched in disbelief as truck after truck turned the corner onto his street, followed by SUVs, sedans, and even a few motorcycles. The sound of engines filled the air as they parked in a line along the street in front of the old movie theater. What the hell is this? Marcus whispered, instinctively stepping behind David. This, David said, his voice thick with emotion, is what happens when people remember what humanity looks like. The first person to get out of the lead truck was a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore work boots and carpenter's pants and moved with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. Behind her came a younger man in military fatigues, then an elderly gentleman in a suit despite the early hour. One by one, people emerged from the vehicles. Men and women of all ages, from teenagers to seniors. Some were dressed for work, others looked like they'd been roused from bed, but they all had one thing in common: they were all carrying something. The woman in work boots approached first, extending her hand to Marcus. Son, my name is Patricia Williams. I'm a contractor here in Portland. David called me at 5 this morning and told me about what you did. Marcus shook her hand tentatively. I don't understand what's happening. What's happening, Patricia said, is that you reminded us what we're supposed to be doing for each other. She gestured to the bag slung over her shoulder. I brought you work boots, size 9, steel-toed. They'll last you years. The man in military fatigues stepped forward next. Sergeant James Martinez, Oregon National Guard. I've got thermal socks, winter gloves, and a sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures. He extended his hand. It's an honor to meet you, Marcus. More people approached, forming a loose circle around Marcus and David. Each person introduced themselves and explained what they'd brought. A backpack filled with non-perishable food, a waterproof jacket, toiletries, a first aid kit, gift cards for local restaurants and grocery stores. Marcus's head was spinning. I can't accept all this. It's too much. Too much? The elderly man in the suit spoke up. He was leaning on a walking cane, but his voice was strong. Son, I'm Judge Harold Thompson, retired. I've seen more cruelty and selfishness in my courtroom than most people see in a lifetime. When David told me about a homeless teenager giving away his only pair of shoes to help a stranger, I knew I had to be here. The judge reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. This contains contact information for 3 different job training programs in Portland, all of which have agreed to interview you immediately. No prerequisites, no barriers, just an opportunity. A younger woman stepped forward, probably in her late 20s. I'm Sarah Chen. I run a non-profit that helps people transition out of homelessness. We have temporary housing available immediately, and I've brought applications for 3 different apartment assistance programs. Marcus looked around at all the faces surrounding him. Some were smiling, others had tears in their eyes, but all of them were looking at him with something he hadn't seen directed at him in months: respect. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why are you all here? I just gave a girl my shoes. People do nice things every day." "No, they don't," said a man in a firefighter's uniform. "Captain Mike Sullivan, Portland Fire Bureau. I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen someone sacrifice something they desperately needed to help a complete stranger." A woman holding a coffee shop uniform stepped forward. "Marcus, I'm Jennifer Adams. I manage the Stumptown Coffee on Burnside. David told me you might be interested in work. I've got a job for you starting Monday if you want it. Full-time, benefits, and we'll work around any training programs you want to pursue." "I don't have experience in coffee," Marcus said weakly. "You have something better than experience," Jennifer replied. "You have character. Everything else can be taught." Patricia Williams spoke up again. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. After David called me this morning, I called my daughter in college, told her about what you did. You know what she said?" Marcus shook his head. "She said, 'Mom, I hope if I'm ever in a situation like that, I have the courage to do what that boy did.'" Patricia's voice wavered. "My 20-year-old daughter, who I've raised to be strong and independent, said she hoped she could be as brave as a homeless teenager. That's when I knew I had to be here." Sergeant Martinez nodded. "I've served with heroes, Marcus. Real heroes. People who risked their lives for others. What you did last night, giving up your protection, your warmth, your dignity for someone you didn't know, that's the kind of heroism that happens in ordinary moments. That's the hardest kind." Judge Thompson tapped his cane on the ground. "In my 40 years on the bench, I've learned that true character isn't revealed in moments of strength. It's revealed in moments of weakness, when you have every excuse to choose yourself over others." The circle of people had grown larger. Marcus counted at least 60 people now, maybe more. Some were still arriving, carrying bags and boxes. "I need you all to understand something," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a kid who's been living on the street for 8 months because the system failed me. I've made mistakes. I've been angry. I've thought about doing things I'm not proud of just to survive." "That makes what you did even more remarkable," said a woman carrying a medical bag. "Dr. Lisa Park, Portland General Hospital. Anyone can be generous when they have plenty. It takes something special to be generous when you have nothing." David stepped closer to Marcus. "Son, these people didn't come here because they think you're perfect. They came because, in a world that often feels cold and selfish, you showed them that compassion still exists. You reminded them of who they want to be." Marcus looked around at all the faces again, and for the first time in months he didn't feel invisible. He didn't feel like a problem to be solved or a nuisance to be avoided. He felt seen, valued, human. If this story is touching you in some way, comment where you're watching us from. Every place has its own pain, and sometimes it's incredible to see how we all connect through stories so human. 3 months later, Marcus stood in front of the mirror in his small studio apartment, adjusting the green apron that had become as familiar to him as his own skin. The Stumptown Coffee logo was embroidered neatly on the front, and below it a small name tag read, "Marcus Shift Supervisor." The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first few weeks had been overwhelming. Learning to live indoors again, managing the anxiety that came with having so much after having nothing, and adjusting to the kindness of strangers who had become friends. But slowly, steadily, Marcus had rebuilt not just his life but his sense of purpose. A knock at his door interrupted his morning routine. Marcus opened it to find David Rodriguez standing in the hallway, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing a broad smile. "Ready for the big day?" David asked, stepping into the apartment. Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully. In the 3 months since that morning behind the theater, David had become something Marcus had never really had before, a father figure. Not in an official capacity, Marcus was still navigating the legal system to establish his independence, but in all the ways that mattered. "I'm nervous," Marcus admitted, settling into one of the 2 chairs that furnished his small living area. Everything in the apartment had been donated by members of the community that had rallied around him, but it felt like home in a way nowhere ever had before. "Good nervous or bad nervous?" David asked. "Good nervous, I think. It's just, a lot of people are going to be there today." Today was the grand opening of Second Chances, a combination coffee shop and community center that Marcus had helped design and would help manage. The idea had emerged from one of the many community meetings that had sprung up after that morning in March. Portland residents, inspired by Marcus's story, had decided they wanted to do more than just help one person. They wanted to create systemic change. Patricia Williams had donated her construction services. Judge Thompson had navigated the legal requirements. Dr. Park had secured health services for the facility. Sergeant Martinez had organized volunteer security. Sarah Chen had established the transitional housing program, and Jennifer Adams had created a job training partnership between Second Chances and Stumptown Coffee. But the heart of the project was Marcus himself. Over the past 3 months, he had become the bridge between the housed and unhoused communities in Portland, helping to create programs that addressed not just immediate needs, but long-term solutions. "Have you heard from Lily lately?" David asked. Marcus's face lit up. Lily, the girl whose crying had started this entire chain of events, had become like a little sister to him. Her mother had eventually gotten the mental health treatment she needed, and their relationship was slowly healing. But Lily still called Marcus every week, and she had been instrumental in designing the youth programs at Second Chances. She called yesterday. She's bringing her mom to the opening today. It'll be the first time they've attended a community event together in years. David nodded approvingly. "And your sister?" Marcus's smile became even brighter. Maya, his younger sister, had been located through the help of Judge Thompson's connections in the family court system. She was now living with a foster family just across town, and they had been rebuilding their relationship slowly and carefully. She was planning to attend college next year, with tuition assistance from a scholarship fund that had been established in Marcus's name. "She's working the coffee station today. She's gotten really good at latte art." As they finished their coffee, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Patricia Williams. "Media is starting to arrive. You ready to tell your story to the world?" The opening of Second Chances had attracted attention far beyond Portland. News outlets from across the country wanted to cover the story of the homeless teenager whose single act of kindness had transformed an entire community's approach to homelessness. Marcus and David walked the 6 blocks to Second Chances together, just as they had every morning for the past month during the final construction phase. The building was beautiful, a converted warehouse with large windows, exposed brick walls, and a warm, welcoming atmosphere that somehow managed to feel both professional and homey. A crowd had already gathered outside. Marcus recognized many faces, people who had shown up that morning in March, others who had joined the effort in the weeks and months since. But there were new faces too, people drawn by the story and the mission. As Marcus approached the front door, he saw a familiar figure standing near the entrance. It was the elderly man who ran the newsstand, where Marcus used to sometimes find day-old sandwiches. The man had never spoken to him during those months on the street, but his eyes had always been kind. "Marcus," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm George Martinez. I wanted to apologize." "Apologize for what?" "For all those months when I saw you on the street and never offered help. I told myself it wasn't my business, that there were organizations for that sort of thing. But watching what you've built here, seeing how this community came together, I realize I was just making excuses." Marcus shook the man's hand firmly. "Mr. Martinez, you never treated me badly. You never looked at me like I was less than human. That meant more than you know." "Still," George said, "I should have done more. We all should have done more sooner." As if summoned by their conversation, Patricia Williams appeared at Marcus's shoulder. "That's exactly why this place exists," she said. "Not to make people feel guilty about the past, but to give everyone a chance to do better going forward." Judge Thompson approached the group, moving slowly but determinedly with his walking cane. "Marcus, the mayor is here. The governor sent a representative. And there's a camera crew from CNN." He paused, studying Marcus's face. "How are you holding up?" Marcus looked around at the crowd, at the building that had risen from his moment of desperation and compassion, at the faces of people who had become his extended family. 6 months ago, he had been invisible, forgotten, just another casualty of a system that didn't know how to help him. Today, he was the catalyst for change that would help hundreds of people like him. "I keep thinking about that night," Marcus said quietly. "When I gave Lily my shoes, I was so focused on the fact that I was losing something important, but I wasn't losing anything at all." "What were you doing?" David asked, though Marcus could tell he already knew the answer. Marcus smiled, watching as Maya waved at him from inside the coffee shop, as Lily and her mother approached hand in hand, as dozens of people who had become his community prepared to celebrate not just the opening of a building, but the opening of hearts and minds. "I was finding everything I never knew I was looking for." The ribbon-cutting ceremony began, but Marcus barely heard the speeches. He was thinking about the power of a single moment of kindness. about how one decision made in darkness could illuminate an entire community. He was thinking about second chances and third chances, and the infinite possibility that existed when people chose to see each other's humanity. As the ribbon fell and the crowd cheered, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. It was David, and beside him stood Patricia, Judge Thompson, Dr. Park, Sergeant Martinez, Jennifer, Sarah, and dozens of others who had become his family. "Ready to change the world, son?" David asked. Marcus looked at the crowd flowing into second chances, at the homeless individuals who would find help and hope inside, at the volunteers who would discover the joy of service, at the community that had learned to see each other more clearly. "I think we already have," he said, "and now that you've reached the end, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Your presence matters, and your story does too. If this story is touching you in some way, comment where you're watching us from. Every place has its own pain, and sometimes it's incredible to see how we all connect through stories so human